Hello and welcome to this edition of Middle East Matters. I'm Julia Kim. Coming up in this week's show. France repatriates 51 women and children from northeast Syria. They'd been living in camps among suspected family members of Islamic State group militants. From talk show host to Israel's most powerful man, Yair Lapid becomes Israel's caretaker prime minister following the collapse of the country's coalition government. And also coming up in the programme, we'll dive into France 24's Observer's report on the bloody Silk Road, the smugglers of modern-day Iran. That's coming up. But first, France has repatriated 35 children and 16 mothers from northeast Syria. They had been living in camps which hold families of suspected Islamic State fighters. Hundreds of children of French nationals are being held in these Kurdish-run facilities where malnutrition and disease are rife. Fraser Jackson has this report.
It's the largest operation of its type by the French government. 51 people have been repatriated from camps in Syria that contained relatives of suspected jihadists.
France has today undertaken the return to the country of 35 French miners who were in camps in northeast Syria. This operation also included the return of 16 mothers from these same camps.
The 16 mothers are set to face judicial proceedings, whilst the minors were handed over to Child Protection Services, aside from one who was also detained as evidence exists likely to prove his association with a terrorist organisation. The 51 people were being held at Rouge Camp, one of several detention sites in Kurdish-controlled northern Syria, the most well-known of which is the overcrowded Al-Hol camp, housing about 56,000 people. Around 10,000 foreigners are thought to have been in the camp where malnutrition and disease are rife, with an average 2 children dying every week. The fate of foreign nationals has been subject to much debate. The Kurdish forces operating the camp have insisted they be sent home, but fearing national security, many European countries have been hesitant to repatriate. Pressure on France to bring back their citizens increased after Germany and Belgium recently decided to fly back all of their minors in detention. For those whose relatives are still being held, Tuesday's announcement was a welcome step.
France is finally making a 180-degree turn. Reason prevail. Now, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. It hopefully means that other repatriations will follow, and my daughter will get her turn to come home.
France's slow case-by-case approach on repatriations has been labelled as a violation of rights by a UN watchdog. Paris has brought back 161 minors since 2016. It's believed over 200 French nationals are still being held in camps in Syria.
Well, for the next 4 months, Yair Lapid will serve as Israel's caretaker prime minister. Lapid took over the premiership last week following the collapse of the country's coalition government. Israel will return to the polls in November for its 5th election in less than 4 years. But until then, Lapid's international agenda is filling up, including a trip to France to meet with President Emmanuel Macron and an upcoming visit from US President Joe Biden next week. France 24's Delano de Souza tells us more about Lapid's rise to power.
58-year-old Yair Lapid has had many lives. A successful journalist turned actor, author, and even singer. He's also got politics in his blood. His father was a well-known journalist who became justice minister. In 2012, Yair Lapid followed in his father's footsteps and created his own political party. The centrist and secular Yesh Atid aimed to represent the middle class in Israel. With his charming good looks, he wasn't taken seriously at first, but his party came in second place in elections in 2013, and he became finance minister under Benjamin Netanyahu. A year later, he quit the government and joined the opposition. Lapid and retired Army General Benny Gantz formed the Blue and White Political Alliance to get rid of Netanyahu, who had been in office for 10 years. However, Gantz formed a unity government with Netanyahu, forcing the Yesh Atid leader to find another ally.
Either we have a Yesh Atid that's strong, or either we have another government that's racist and homophobic.
After last year's election, Yair Lapid and the extreme right's Naftali Bennett cobbled together a coalition unlike any Israel had ever seen, comprising the right, the centre, the left, and for the first time an Arab party. The deal the two men struck was to share the Prime Minister's post. While waiting his turn for the top job, Lapid became Foreign Minister. He continued to normalize relations with Arab states, a process which began after the Abraham Accords were signed in 2020 with Morocco, Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates. When it comes to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, he's in favor of talks for a two-state solution, a prospect he hasn't been able to fully develop. And now, with Parliament dissolved, Lapid became interim Prime Minister and is fighting to remain in his job.
The fight with Iran, terrorism at home, the education crisis in Israel, the cost of living, boosting our security personnel. When the challenges are this great, we cannot let our disagreements pull us apart. We need each other.
With elections scheduled for the start of November, Yair Lapid has 4 months to convince Israelis he's got what it takes to lead.
And we end in Iran. And this week we bring you a special report by our Observers team on the country's smugglers. Smuggling is a huge part of the Iranian economy. All kinds of products change hands illegally, from contraband items like alcohol and satellite dishes to washing machines, phones and car parts. But little is known about the actors that operate in the shadows. Well, for more on this, we're joined by Ershad Alijani from France 24's Observers. Ershad, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Let's first take a look at an excerpt of your report.
Shooties, who drive their souped-up Peugeots at 200 kilometers an hour across the country. Kulbars, who carry dishwashers and big-screen TVs on their backs across the Kurdish mountains. And suktbars, who risk their lives driving loads of diesel through the desert. These are the smugglers of modern-day Iran.
Ershad, let's start with the cool bars. What kind of items do they bring into the country?
The Kulbars are ethnic Kurds. They cross into Iraqi Kurdistan, bring back all kind of consumer goods across the mountains. TV sets, dishwashers, alcohol, clothing. They carry everything on their back. Huge loads of up to 70 kilos. It's a very dangerous job. We are talking about the border between Iran and Iraq. High and cold mountain with minefields, which have been here since the Iran-Iraq war in the 80s. And we can see what one of them told us.
It's a very dangerous job, if you can even call it a job. Last summer, I fell from a cliff and I had to stay at home for a month. I lost a lot of income because of that. Last year, a friend of mine died after falling from the mountain, and another one lost his 2 legs after a mine explosion.
But the biggest danger is the Iranian border guards. Kulbars say despite public pleas by Iranian officials, including Ali Khamenei, Iran's supreme leader, the reality on the ground has never changed. They shoot at the Kulbars to kill them. That's what the Kulbars say. Kurdish NGOs estimate that more than 100 Kulbars were shot and killed between March 2020 and March 2021. So
what happens once the items then are inside the country?
That's when the shooties take over. Shooties transport all kinds of goods. For example, alcohol which come from the Iraqi Kurdistan, cigarettes, cell phones, and other high-ticket items who come from the Persian Gulf, or other products like even bodybuilding supplements, car and motorcycle parts, and designer clothing. Their job is to take goods from city to city. What they do is that they take an ordinary car, like mostly Peugeots and Citroens, then they modify them so they can carry loads up to 1 ton, and they drive more than 200 kilometers per hour. We can see the next clip maybe.
It takes about 6 hours for ordinary people to reach Tehran from our city, but we deliver loads in 2.5 hours. That means hitting speeds above 200 kilometers per hour.
The shooties also installed James Bond-style gadgets to help them avoid arrest.
We use fake license plates so the police can't trace us.
Smoke machines are another favorite. And tire spikes.
The gadgets work when the police come across you at random, at a checkpoint, for example, and then start pursuing you. But if the police have organized a big operation, the gadgets won't work. They'll have other cars supporting them, and sometimes even helicopters. There's no way you can get away.
Besides fines and arrests, being issued is very dangerous. High-speed chases often ends in fatal accidents. And that's not only the shooties, it's also very dangerous for the suktbars. They transport diesel across the border between Iran and Pakistan in the southeast of Iran. Their cargo catches fire after either accidents or the police shooting at them.
So why do they take this risk? Is it worth it?
Honestly, I can't consider them as criminals. They are poor, especially the suktbars and kulbars. They get a flat fee. Imagine a suktbar risking his life for a job that sometimes takes a week for 50 euros. Or a kulbar must avoid minefields and be careful not to get shot by the Iranian border guards for 15 euros. These people are victims of the general severe poverty in Iran. It's a consequence of deep-rooted corruption, decades of mismanagement, and international sanctions tied to Iranian nuclear activities.
Ershad Alijani, that's all the time we have, unfortunately. Thank you very much for sharing that with us here on Middle East Matters. And that's it from us. Stay tuned for more world news here on France 24.